AudioScript's book, The Scent of the Night, by Andrea Camilleri. Chapter 1. The Enigmatic Disappearance. The story begins with a sudden and intense change in the weather that wakes up Captain Montalbano in the middle of the night. The shutters of his house are banging hard against the wall due to a strong tramontana, a north wind, that has unexpectedly erupted. Montalbano, half asleep, thinks he is in the middle of an armed conflict in his sleep and suddenly wakes up, drenched in sweat and cold from the bitter cold. He gets up muttering profanities and runs to close the window to stop the wind. The atmosphere is reminiscent of a change of era. Summer seems to have already ended, giving way to a harsh and cold autumn, which feels more like winter. After closing the window, he returns to his bed, immersed in thoughts of the seasons that pass quickly and leave the fast flow of life behind. His memories are full of nostalgia for the earlier times, when there was more time for peace and thought. In the morning, when he prepares to go to his office, he is forced to put on a thick sweater to cope with the cold, as his winter suit has absorbed the heavy mothballs smell from the wardrobe. As he tries to get dressed, his sweater is blown away by the wind and ends up on the beach sand, forcing him to chase after it. He finally manages to catch it before he is swept away by the sea, but the sweater is destroyed. At that moment, the phone rings. It's his fiancée, Livia, who informs him that she's enjoying the sun and will be spending the day with a friend. Montalbano hangs up the phone full of bitterness, realizing that his day did not start well. Before he can recover, he receives an urgent phone call from his colleague, Catarella. Someone is holding hostage Mcheritella Cosentino, the secretary of the accountant Gargano, and threatens to kill her unless he has returned the money stolen by her employer, who has been missing for days. Montalbano leaves his house in a hurry and heads for the accountant's office. Chapter 2. The Loyalty of Macatella. Manager Cosentino, the secretary of the missing accountant Emanuele Gargano, is a woman with a deep loyalty to her employer, despite the fact that everyone around her believes he has abandoned her. At the accountant's office, Manager sits in her usual seat every day, waiting for his return, while passers-by mock her and think her naive. Her faith in Gargano is so strong that she firmly believes that he has not absconded with his client's money, but has lost his memory and will return to restore things. Accountant Emanuele Gargano had appeared in Vigata about 2 years ago, where he opened a brokerage office. With a reputation as an investment wizard from Milan, he quickly gained the trust of many elderly pensioners who entrusted him with their savings. These investments seemed to yield huge profits, which fueled even more confidence and enthusiasm. But Morticella was not just an employee. From the first moment she met him, she fell madly in love with him. She had lived a lonely life, helping her elderly parents, and the accountant became the center of her world. When he disappeared, Mcheritella could not accept that the man she loved would betray her in such a way. To her, Emanuele was a man of moral values, and his disappearance was the result of some unfortunate event, such as amnesia or a serious accident. Chapter 3. The Episode with Garzello. Montalbano arrives at the accountant's office and is confronted with a scene of great tension. Salvatore, Garzello, an elderly surveyor, is holding Morticella hostage with an old revolver and threatens to kill her if his money is not returned. Garzello, like many others in the town, had invested his life savings in Gargano, believing it would bring him high profits. But now he feels betrayed and wants revenge. Montalbano decides to intervene with diplomacy. Without rushing, he approaches Garzello in a non-threatening manner. Instead of treating him as a criminal, he speaks to him in a friendly tone and tries to calm him down. With a clever lie, she tells him that Gargano has already been arrested and that the client's money will be returned. Garzello, exhausted and confused, is persuaded by the policeman and surrenders his gun. From the moment Montalbano manages to get the gun out of Garzello's hands, the atmosphere is filled with a sense of relief, both for the officer and his colleagues who are watching the situation. Garzello, exhausted by the physical and psychological tension, seems confused and helpless, as Montalbano's lie that Gargano has already been arrested has convinced him that there is no reason to continue his resistance. Montalbano approaches the old man in a gentle and friendly manner, managing to remove the old revolver from his hands without any reaction. Garcello, visibly weakened, surrenders in silence. He asks him if he is all right and if he needs help, and the old man, in a voice barely audible, says he does not feel well. The intensity of the situation, the fear and confusion that had overwhelmed him begin to make his body paralyzed from exhaustion. Montalbano realizes the criticality of the moment and immediately calls his men, Fazio and Galuzzo, to help him. The two men carefully pick up Garcello and escort him to the police vehicle to take him to the hospital. During the transport, Garcello appears to weaken even further. As the vehicle approaches the hospital, the elderly man loses consciousness. When they get there, paramedics immediately take him away and put him on a stretcher to transport him inside the building. However, things are deteriorating fast. The doctors are doing what they can, but Garcello can't take the pressure he had experienced. Minutes after being admitted to the hospital, he succumbs to a massive heart attack. His death is confirmed shortly afterwards, leaving Montalbano and his team with a feeling of frustration and bitterness, as the elderly man had gone so far as to threaten someone else's life due to the desperation he felt from Gargano's deception. The news of Garcello's death creates turmoil in the community, especially among Gargano's other deceived clients, who feel that their desperation and despair are driving them to the edge. Montalbano, for his part, although he was able to prevent a tragedy in Gargano's office, cannot prevent Garcello's loss, which leaves a bitter taste in his mouth as he realizes how profoundly such a scam can affect people's lives. Chapter 4. The Disappearance of Gargano. After the situation with Garcello has been defused, Montalbano turns his attention to the investigation of accountant Emmanuel Gargano. The case is complicated and full of holes. Gargano had managed to gain the trust of many people in Vigata by promising them huge investment profits. These profits were spectacular, with rates of up to 23%, and investors, mostly elderly, were delighted. However, Gargano suddenly disappeared, leaving behind hundreds of victims who had entrusted their savings. Theories about his disappearance abound. Some believe that he has fled abroad with the money, while others believe that he was murdered by the mafia because he may have deceived them too. Montalbano, however, remains skeptical. The case seems too complicated to be so simple. The policeman begins to investigate the accountant's last movements and search for possible traces of him. Some of his colleagues believe that Gargano has managed to escape with the money to some exotic place, but Montalbano is skeptical. There are many unusual details in the case, and the policeman begins to suspect that the accountant's disappearance is not just an ordinary fraud. Montalbano notices a series of unusual details that make him suspect that Gargano's disappearance is not just an ordinary hoax. First, the timing of the accountant's disappearance seems very well thought out. Gargano had just completed another round of investments and had promised his clients even greater profits. His sudden disappearance occurred just when the clients were most excited and had no doubt about the validity of their investments. This perfect coincidence of timing makes Montalbano wonder if Gargano had prepared his escape long before, waiting for the right moment to disappear. Moreover, speculation about the involvement of the mafia in the case brings further doubts. If Gargano was deceiving the mafia, it is unlikely that he did so without taking protective measures. His sudden disappearance without leaving any clues behind suggests that he was either extremely adept at covering his tracks, or he had some significant support from people who knew how to protect him. Montalbano is not sure if Gargano had accomplices, or if client money was used to buy the silence of important people. Another strange detail concerns the physical presence of Gargano. Although he had luxury cars and an office that looked modern and advanced, the tools he used on a daily basis were rather outdated. There were no state-of-the-art computers in his office, something one would expect from a man involved in financial transactions. The lack of modern computer systems makes Montalbano wonder if Gargano kept some important information outside of conventional channels in order to avoid recording it. This decision seems to be deliberate, to reduce the traces of his fraud. Moreover, Gargano's personal life remains a mystery. Although he seemed to live a life of success and luxury, none of his associates knew much about his private life. Neither his employees nor his clients knew details of where he stayed when he was not in Vigata, nor even if he had any family or significant friends. This mysterious distance he maintained from those around him is another indication that Gargano had prepared for his disappearance long before the fraud took place. Chapter 5. Montalbano's relationship with the commander. As the investigation progresses, Montalbano is facing pressure from his commanding officer, Benetti Alderigi. Their relationship is strained, as the commander tends to keep a tight rein on Montalbano and interferes in his affairs. On many occasions, the commander criticizes the policeman for the way he handles his cases, but Montalbano resists and maintains his independence. Gargano's case is particularly sensitive for the governor, who wants an immediate solution, as the accountant's disappearance has caused great concern in the community. Montalbano, however, is in no hurry. He knows that this case is much more complicated than it seems and does not want to make any hasty moves. Commander Benetti Alderigi repeatedly tries to control Montalbano's investigation in various ways, taking advantage of his position in the hierarchy. First of all, he puts constant pressure on him to resolve the case as quickly as possible, ignoring the delicacy that such a complex investigation requires. The commander is more interested in presenting immediate results in order to show his superiors that the case is moving towards resolution, and less interested in the actual investigation. To achieve this control, he regularly contacts Montalbano, either by phoning him to ask him to report on any minor developments or by calling him to his office for meetings that take him away from his main work. These constant interruptions are intended to keep the officer under surveillance and force him to report constantly on the progress of the case. In addition, Benetti Alderigi tries to direct the research in specific directions. He often instructs where Montalbano should focus or insists that certain elements are more important than others, interfering with the team's priorities. This practice causes Montalbano intense frustration, as he realizes that the commander's orders are not based on a true understanding of the case, but on an attempt to show that he is in control. The culmination of this attempt at control comes when the commander decides to assign parts of the investigation to other officers, such as Captain Garnata, despite the fact that Montalbano is the most qualified to handle the case. Garnata, who is considered an expert in financial fraud, takes over significant portions of the investigation, which reduces Montalbano's ability to direct the investigation according to his own strategy. All of this creates a heated confrontation between the two men, with Montalbano trying to maintain his independence, while the commander does his best to control every aspect of the investigation, but without understanding the complexity of the case. Chapter 6. The Traces of Gargano. Montalbano's investigation begins to bear fruit when he identifies two former associates of Gargano, a young economics graduate, Giacomo Pellegrino, and a student working in the office, Michela Maganaro. The two are young men with knowledge of technology and the financial world, and are important witnesses in the case. From their testimonies, Montalbano learns more details about how Gargano's fraud worked. The two former employees described that Gargano used investors' money in a way that created the impression of high profits. The business operated like a pyramid scheme, where new investments were used to pay off the profits of previous investors. This cycle continued for some time, building customer confidence, until the flow of money stopped abruptly. The young employees report that Gargano had convinced them that the investments they had were perfectly safe and that there was a steady flow of capital from large investors. However, when the accountant disappeared, none of them had access to the company's actual financial information. The two were left in the dark and had no clue as to Gargano's whereabouts. Montalbano requests that the office computer systems be searched to locate any clues to Gargano's latest movements. Although the data on the accountant's computers has been carefully deleted, the detective hopes to discover something that could lead to the discovery of Gargano's hiding place. While the computers are subjected to a thorough search, Montalbano notices something strange. Gargano, although he owned luxury cars equipped with modern technology, his office did not have state-of-the-art computers. This fact makes Montalbano suspect that the accountant might have prepared for his disappearance and had created a perfectly organized escape plan. Chapter 7. The Dilemma of Macatella. While the investigation continues, manager Cosentino still faithfully awaits Gargano's return, refusing to accept that the man she loves could have abandoned her in such a way. To her, Gargano was not a crook, but a man of high moral values who had suffered some misfortune and would return to restore the truth. Chiarotella is absolutely convinced that Gargano did not leave with the money. Her belief is so strong that she refuses to listen to the facts and evidence presented against him. When Montalbano asks her if she has any information about the accountant, she flatly denies knowing anything more than what the authorities have discovered. She claims that if he had contacted her, he would have already revealed it to Mimi Lagello, the lieutenant who was in charge of the case in the first place. Although Chiarotella's attitude may seem naive, Montalbano perceives it with a deep pity. He sees a woman who has been betrayed emotionally and financially by the man in whom she had invested not only her savings, but also her heart. Montalbano tries to convince her to leave the office, fearing that someone else might try to hurt her, like Garcillo. But she refuses to leave, insisting that if Gargano returns and does not find her, he will believe that she has abandoned him too. The woman's attitude is reminiscent of a tragedy. She is trapped in a world that has collapsed around her, but she continues to hope that the person who will restore her lost dignity and security will return at some point. For Montalbano, her faith is both tragic and desperate. Chapter 8. The End of the Research. With the investigation nearing its end, Montalbano is forced to admit that the accountant Gargano has disappeared without a trace. The case is full of unanswered questions, and the investigation fails to locate either Gargano or the investor's money. Despite extensive searches of the office computers and interviews with everyone involved, the detective is unable to find any clues that lead him to the exact location of the accountant. The searches on the computers in Gargano's office are proving to be extremely important, but at the same time frustrating. When experts examine the data on the computers, they find that many files have been very carefully deleted, indicating that Gargano had made provisions to cover his tracks before he disappeared. Despite the experts' efforts to recover the deleted data, they find nothing that can provide a clear clue to the accountant's location or where the client's money might be. The computer research also reveals that Gargano used sophisticated methods to keep the funds secret. There are some traces of stock trades, but not enough to form a clear picture of exactly what he did with his client's money. This leaves Montalbano and his team with the feeling that Gargano had organized his fraud in such a way that he disappeared without leaving any significant evidence behind. In terms of interviews with the people involved, Montalbano and his team are talking to several people who had invested their money through Gargano's office. These interviews provide valuable insights into the operation of his business and how deep the trust his clients had in him. All the clients, mostly elderly pensioners, described Gargano as a charming and persuasive man who promised them large profits with little risk. During the interviews, it becomes apparent that many of the customers were misled by the seemingly large refunds they were seeing on their bills. However, none seemed to have a full picture of exactly how their investments were working, confirming that Gargano had created a complex scam based on a lack of transparency and investor confidence. These interviews, while helpful in understanding Gargano's modus operandi, failed to offer any significant clues about his location or what happened to the money. Chapter 9. What happened to Gargano? Theories remain ambiguous. Some still believe that Gargano has taken refuge on an exotic island where he enjoys the stolen money. Others claim that the accountant has been murdered by one of his defrauded clients or by a criminal with whom he was involved in his illegal activities. Montalbano cannot rule out any of these scenarios. The case leaves a bitter taste in the policeman's mouth as he feels that justice has not been done. The victims of the fraud, particularly elderly investors, are left without their savings and with no hope of getting them back. Although a victim like the others, manager Cosentino refuses to see the truth and continues to wait for Gargano's return, while everyone around her considers her lost in her illusion. Montalbano leaves the case with a feeling of incomplete vindication. Although he was able to prevent a tragedy with Garcillo, he was unable to bring back the stolen money or find the accountant who had wiped out the dreams and hopes of so many people. The Gada's world has changed, and Gargano's disappearance becomes a symbol of the impunity, corruption, and fraud that dominate modern society. Summing up, this sprawling narrative captures the gradual development of a complex police case with Montalbano facing uncertainty, human despair, and elusive justice. The end of the story is emotionally charged and leaves the reader with questions about the moral and social implications of such a large-scale fraud. It was Andrea Camilleri's book, The Scent of Night. AudioScript narration. If you liked this AudioScript, please like and subscribe to support our channel.